This is WPSL Port St. Lucie, the talk of the Treasure Coast.
.1008 at WPSL 1590, the talk of the Treasure Coast. During this historic week, Ask a Rabbi.
And this is Rabbi Shafir Loeb of Congregation Eitz Chayim, your Jewish home on the Treasure Coast. And I wish to welcome everybody this grim Friday, whatever day this is, morning, as we have cooling weather in Florida, which is nice.
Fall is here.
Fall is here. I actually picked up a red leaf. We went to lunch Wednesday, and one of the local maple trees gave me a leaf.
There you go.
So, yeah.
Yeah, of course, Facebook is just loaded with all of the beautiful scenes from New England, whether it's Vermont, New Hampshire, in Maine, you name it.
Yeah,
it's
all
like,
those.
Oh.
That I truly miss the fall, just the beautiful colors.
See, growing up in L.A., I never saw a change of season.
Never had season.
And really, the year and a half that I was serving my prison sentence in Bristol, Connecticut, it was Carol and I spent every off time traversing New England, and it was, gosh, those colors.
The colors
hit you in the face. They're so beautiful.
Oh, I have to tell you, we used to, when we were showing dogs and selling jewelry, we used to travel the hills of Pennsylvania, Ohio, West Virginia. God's paintbrush is just spectacular.
See, I have never been to West Virginia, at least that I remember.
Oh, take the West Virginia Turnpike used to be a source of great laughter because it was a 2-lane road once upon a time. But now it's a beautiful, beautiful highway with a beautiful rest stop called Tamarack. It's got shops. It's got all kinds of wonderful. It's worth a trip down through West Virginia. Stop at Tamarack, shop there. I haven't been there in years, but the last times I was there, it was definitely worth it.
Okay, I got to get to this week.
Do
you have friends still over there?
I have family.
You have family over there?
I have family.
Oh, God. Are they okay?
As last report, didn't talk to them in the last day or so, but.
Now, where are they compared to where all this craziness is going on?
They're in what's called central Israel, but I realize that Israel is not that huge.
It's tiny.
It's a tiny country. Gaza is even a smaller area. Gaza is 147 square miles.
Wow.
I don't know. What's St. Lucie County?
I think it's bigger than that.
I
think it is.
You have to realize that, and that holds 2.3 or 2.4 million people.
Yeah.
It's just, we cannot begin to imagine what it must be like to live in Gaza as a civilian. And life is beyond hard, and it's not that they can just get up and leave. They can't. There are just no good, easy ways out.
Not knowing the geography, can't they scoot up to Jordan, or is there no?
They've got to cross Israel to do it.
Oh, okay.
Right, and that's been one of the issues in trying to set up a two-state solution, which is that Gaza's on the left, on the west coast. It's on the shore. It's a little tiny strip that pokes out of Egypt. Egypt's on its south, and Israel's on the north and east of it. And it's just this little finger of land that pokes up, little tiny piece. And then you've got Israel, and then you've got the West Bank, and then you've got Jordan. as you're going across. Not that it's going to take you long. It's only a few hours by car.
Yeah, if they're not shooting at you.
Well, that helps, yes. It helps the car move.
Well, and Tom Sullivan was mentioning something yesterday afternoon. He said the thing that's always perplexed him about Gaza, he said, wouldn't you think you get this strip of land on the water? He said, wouldn't you think you could develop that? But instead,
No, they have. It is a cruise stop. There are people. In fact, one of the members in my congregation, knew somebody from Europe who was on a cruise that had stopped in Gaza.
Oh, no.
And they, of course, evacuated as soon as everything happened. They rounded everybody up and hightailed it to either Cyprus or Greece. But so there is let me rephrase it. There was a seaport. Israel, of course, has been bombing it. I don't know its condition, and I wouldn't be surprised if it's no longer usable.
Yeah.
And they have no other natural resources. They don't have oil. So candidly, the world doesn't really care about them, unfortunately. That's the piece.
Ugh.
And it's filled largely with the outgrowth from refugee camps. Gaza City's always been there. But it's a very difficult piece of real estate. Very, very poor as a rule. Not to say that there aren't the 1% that are filthy rich. There are. But the average Gazan does not have much money. They struggle for food. It's been under a blockade since 2007.
Whose blockade?
Israel.
Israel.
And Egypt doesn't want them either.
Well, yeah. What? They close their border.
Well, because they're a terrorist organization. Okay, this is the piece that this is the wild card and why it's so difficult. Hamas is not the legitimate government. Yes, they did win an election. I'll give that. But there hasn't been an election there in forever. They're basically a terrorist group holding the Gazans as hostage as well. And so you've got a little bit of a kind of a Stockholm syndrome effect going on, because Gazans, there's a whole generation that doesn't know any different.
They, Channel 5, I think, had an interview with a young lady who was an exchange student from Gaza at FAU. And she said, I am Palestinian. She said, I do not support Hamas.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or Hezbollah. Either one.
If they have any access to the outside world, which admittedly is Hamas tries to shut down.
I'll bet they do. Sure.
So what there needs to be is a humanitarian way to bring reality into Gaza and a way to empower the people. But it's not easy, because just as Hamas will behead women and children in the horrors of what happened last weekend, they'll do that to Gazans. And it's not an easy solution. It's an extreme poverty situation. Israel controls the water, the power, all of the supply services, and much of the way that food gets in. Although some of it, that's part of the reason for the tunnels, is to bring food and basic supplies in. And clearly that's functioning, and Israel keeps trying to find the tunnels. Some of them go down into Egypt. Just as they go out, they go in every direction, anywhere that they can work it. And as CNN did a wonderful piece, I was actually reading that this morning, of looking at the weapons that they use. As you commented when I walked in, they're not sophisticated.
Oh, no.
They're modified AKs. They're old pickup trucks with AKs bolted to the windshields.
It reminds me of ISIS.
It very much is ISIS tactics. And so you have to think that training is being shared between these two organizations. Hamas is just, it's a terror thing. And granted that it all started as a way to win the hearts by bringing hospitals and schools. That's how Hamas started. And so they were seen as saviors, and then they just sort of showed their dark side.
Like the Taliban has.
Exactly. And that's true of all of the radicalized terrorist organizations. They're well organized, but they're gangs. They're out of control gang rule. That's what it is. It's gang butchery. You've seen it when you've seen gang violence. It gets out of control.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that even the leaders of these organizations are surprised at how vicious some of their soldiers become. And I'm using the term more in a gang concept than in a military. They're not militants, they're terrorists. And I work with a number of Muslims in many contexts. I've got a Saudi tutoring student that I'm working with, is American and Saudi. He's got dual citizenship. And he's horrified by this. And, so, how can I say it? People who know the world are horrified by it. But I can't imagine the average Gazan who's faced with that butchery next to them not saying, yes, sir.
Well, and apparently, at least, again, going back to CNN, as I was reading on Twitter this morning, they're apparently not letting the Gazans
Of course not.
leave. They want them there to
But
be
because it's a
victims.
human shield.
Yeah, right.
Right. So here's the if you just listen to what Hamas has said, right, who I think it was on CNN, but I wouldn't swear to it. I watch CNN, BBC. I watch a bunch of different.
Yeah, the BBC covers.
BBC does a great job of covering it. Even Al Jazeera is horribly anti-Hamas, and
they do. By the way, Al Jazeera
does an amazing job.
They do a good job of reporting.
Yeah, they really do. They're an excellent
yeah.
reporting group. But I've been watching so many different. I typically have 7 or 8 news sites up for when I have a few minutes to peruse them, and it's been horrible, to say the least. But when Hamas made a statement, they said, well, nobody who lives in the occupied parts of Palestine, which is how they refer to Israel, is a civilian. Right? So the 3-year-old child, in their eyes, they're dehumanizing them by doing that. And that, when you take the correct mental illness, you can turn that into something really horrible. Okay, so they know how to use people and take those people over the end, and with the goal of creating terror. That's why they're called terrorists. They want to create terror in their victims.
Mm-hmm.
And they have created that terror not only among Israelis, but among Gazans. And Gazans, that's a weird thing. They're not a legitimate country, so they don't have passports. They don't have a real country.
Wait a minute. How do they travel internationally?
They have to do it on a permit.
Permit. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
It's a weird. We don't realize how weird it is for Gazans to try. That's part of why they can't do much. Right? Nobody is giving them. Nobody is listening to them. Nobody is giving them legitimacy. Everybody has shut the door and let them basically rot in place.
Oh.
And that's part of why Hamas can do so much. Because if they do anything, it's viewed favorably when the rest of the world does nothing.
Why couldn't I know this question's so ridiculous. Why couldn't Jordan, Egypt, and Israel all get together and give some territory, whether it's part of it's in Jordan, whatever, to the citizens, not talking Hamas, but
Yeah. Well, I would be wonderful if they would let Gaza, say, flip and take some more land further south and become a little city-state. Let them become a city-state. Let them have some autonomy. The problem is, how do you monitor Hamas-type activities? Right, their training camps. They CNN estimated, based on it, and it's amazing what they can do. They can go back through the videos that Hamas has released, and they can figure out where these were shot. But they have determined 2 camps up on the northeast corner of Gaza, one about central Gaza, and then 3 in the south. And, when they say, oh, it's just a few miles from the border, that's because there's only a few miles of Gaza. Figure it out, folks. 147 square miles is not a lot of territory.
Mm-hmm. Now, when you lived there, did you go into Gaza?
I did not go into Gaza. I did go into the West Bank. I did go into some of the refugee camps and look at them, and the squalor then was horrible. But again, that's as corrupt a system as we have on the planet. Those were the people whose homes were lost, and that's a horrible checkered story, folks. It's not nobody's all right, nobody's all wrong. The local Arabs were told, there's going to be fighting here tomorrow. Get out. Get out right now. And so they left their homes with their keys, with food in their homes. And when they tried to come back 2 or 3 days later, they were blocked.
Oh.
And so that makes up some of the refugees. Others are, it's this weird, we can take it all the way back to England. When England was making wild promises, they promised the Arabs that they would have self-determinacy once the Ottoman Empire crumbled.
And this is when they carved up that area?
They carved up that area, right? France got parts of it. England got parts of it. That's how the English protectorate or mandate of India and all of that Asian mess, and they partitioned an area they called Palestine. They called it Palestine. If you look at stamps, if you look at postal things, they all say Palestine in that period.
Wow.
That's before the state of Israel. It's a mandated. It never was a country. See, that's the jargon, and that's the danger in some of the rhetoric. The rhetoric on both sides is not designed for peace. And that's just a reality. Part of that's rooted in the It's not caused by the British, but it's rooted in Britain. Britain promised the Hashemite kingdom of Jordan self-determinacy. They promised the Arabs living in Palestine self-determinacy, and they promised the Jews self-determinacy.
So was there not a Jordan during that period of time?
I would have to look back. I'm not sure exactly when Jordan started. They annexed the West Bank and named it Transjordan, meaning crossing the river, that part of Jordan, because they thought that the money that the UN has been filtering in to keep the refugee camps alive would be more than they would need to actually administer them. They discovered that wasn't the case, because when you have that many poor people in a small piece of land, it ain't good.
It's a problem.
It's a problem. And the expenses of quote-unquote maintaining that is much more difficult. And you might say, why didn't they let them out of the refugee camps and absorb them? Well, first of all, they don't identify as Jordanian. They identify as their own indigenous group whose families have lived on that land for generations. And the question becomes, how far back do we go to establish identity? That's an arbitrary question.
Sounds like the American Indians and the Australians.
Yeah. It's all, and that's the piece nobody wants to hear. Nobody wants to hear it's relative about anything. It's a horrible situation. The system, and
This is where it seems like the system has totally failed the Gazans.
Oh, it totally has. And they're right that nobody really wants them because the other communities, Saudi Arabia is tribal, and by that what I mean is that you can't move to Saudi Arabia and become a Saudi citizen. You can become a resident, but you can't become a citizen. They don't
Really?
have naturalization the way that America does. This is a different. One of the things that America did differently is the way that it defines citizenship, which is different. It's anybody who's born here, which allows a lot of people to have dual citizenship, and we also allow naturalization. That isn't the case in the whole world. So in Saudi, you can move there, you can marry a Saudi, but unless your children are the children of Saudis, they can have citizenship, but you never will. That's just the way the country's set up. And you might say, well, that's horrible, but let's take a closer look. You can't become a Seminole just by deciding, you can't live on the reservation unless you're already a member.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So there's...
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right? So we have to look at it, but that's a peaceful situation, and there are good peaceful solutions to that rule. You can't use the clubhouse at Riverland unless you're a resident and have the fob. So there's all kinds of turfing degrees in society. And this plays out. We're asking countries that have had millennia of these kinds of citizenship ideas and identity kinds of ideas to just change and become more flexible, right? Become more European. And that's part of the other problem, is that between World War I and World War II, the influx of Jews coming out of Europe was huge. And it, of course, became even larger with the displaced Jews during the Holocaust.
Right.
And the local Arab population that was living in the mandated area of Palestine, Britain's mandated area, because they carved up the world and mandated territories in their expansionism. They were Europeans. The Jews coming in were Europeans. If you listen to what West Bank or Gazans will say to the guards, then they'll speak Hebrew to the guards. So I can hear it. And what they're saying to them is, are your parents European? So it's a cultural issue between the waves of immigration that are European and the local population that had a different lifestyle.
Wow. What I think the most shocking thing that, other than the video from Hamas, was the various areas of the world, like Sydney, Australia, and you hear these massive demonstrations, kill the Jews, and even some in Europe. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, what is this?
It's a long, ingrained hatred. And human beings can lump people and dehumanize them. If we didn't do that, we wouldn't have had slavery. We wouldn't have had the massacre of indigenous populations. We wouldn't have the stolen children that didn't stop until recently. Australia recently apologized to their indigenous population for doing that. And when I say stolen children, that's quote unquote save the person and lose the Indian.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
That's taking children out of their identity, out of their culture, and bringing them into quote unquote civilized school so they learn white man's ways.
Well, there was that news story, I guess that was going on in Canada for, decades up there with the Indians as well.
They're still doing it, right. And the number of Native women who've just gone missing.
That was part of that, yeah.
Right? I mean, we're not talking handfuls, we're talking thousands.
Yeah.
That nobody cares about because they're women, they're indigenous. They don't even get a police response when somebody goes missing. They just go missing. If we think the world is civilized, we are lying to ourselves. We are not civilized. You don't have to scrape the veneer very long. Somebody, if you're really interested, Google Milgram's obedience experiment. Look at Zimbardo's Stanford prison experiment. Those are two experiments, by the way, would not pass today's ethics standards. They would not be approved. They would not be allowed to do those things. And if you really want to look at something else, take a look at Harlow's monkey experiment, one of the most sad, tragic, again, an experiment that wouldn't happen today, that was done on rhesus monkeys, where the babies were separated from their mothers at birth. And the monkeys don't grow up with any social skills.
Oh.
And they're easily terrified. The behaviors are off the charts because they don't get maternal cuddling when they're babies. They are damaged, and that is going on anywhere where children are taken from their parents. Okay, so
that's hard to imagine.
And I'm sure that that's going on, especially in terrorist-controlled areas, where there are far too many orphans created that are the fodder for them. So they'll take those children, they'll give them almost enough nurturing to make them obedient. And if you think they don't understand the psychological principles that I'm describing, they understand them, may not be able to express them, but they know them. They know them as every abuser knows how to use people. These people are groomed the same way that trafficked people are groomed to accept it, to recognize that they're property, they belong to somebody else, and there is nowhere else for them to go. And if you could get to some of the quote-unquote foot soldiers, and I use the term very loosely, if you could get to the cannon fodder, because that's how the terrorists look at them, right? These people who've been groomed, you're going to find that same story over and over again. And you can find the same thing with a young girl or boy who's being trafficked in Delray. They have nowhere to turn. Life is better with their abusers than it would be without them.
Oh, God. Oh, brother. Yeah.
And so we see that kind of, I'm not human, I don't have to treat anybody as a human. Treat me like an animal and I will be one. That's the kind of behavior that we're seeing. So until somebody gets in and breaks that cycle, it's going to continue. And it's going to take somebody smarter and wiser than the folks running the show right now. Because right now, as we've said at other shows, it's all about testing weaponry with a people that nobody really cares about, but can give lip service to.
Vietnam.
All over. There are 9 active conflict sites in the world today. Israel is one of them, but not the only one. We don't have to go far north to get to another one. There are a number of them around the planet. We don't hear about them.
It's interesting. There was a classmate of mine at Loyola who was, I guess you could say, in a CIA program, and they were organizing some operation in Vietnam. Keep in mind that was 1964, and they were doing experiments, and I'm thinking,
experiments that would not pass the ethics boards today. Let's look a little closer to
because nobody cared about the people in Vietnam at that point.
Exactly. Look at what's going on at Guantanamo Bay, Gitmo.
Oh.
And that's offshore so that ethics boards can't touch it. It's not an accident that it's offshore. Yeah.
It's like those prison ships that you hear about. that are
our whole prison system in the U.S. is horrific.
Oh, yeah. Well,
Don't get me started. I mean,
private prisons? Yeah.
compare what we've got to, say, Germany. Right? Germany, who did the Holocaust, now has one of the most admired prison systems in the world. Not that they aren't fighting problems with radicalism, because they are. Not that they aren't fighting problems with drugs, because they are. But they have 1/10 the crime rate that we have, and they have 1/10 the prisoners that we have per capita. And you can sit here and say to me it's a smaller country. It's still per capita. That's per 1,000.
Mm-hmm.
We're 9 to 10 times higher. And look at our prisons. They're disproportionately poor people.
I'm sure. What is your guess on what is going to happen? Obviously, the Israelis warning the Gazans that it could turn into a ground war.
Oh, I'm unfortunately expecting it to. I don't see where they can go. I don't see how they'll get there. I'm guessing that what Israel is maybe imagining is that they'll go to the south of Gaza while they flatten the north, and then there won't be any shelter to go back to, but everybody will go north and Israel will flatten the south, and there will be nothing but empty rubble left.
Would they...
I don't know that, but
would they be willing to assimilate the moms and the babies and stuff like that into their society?
Not any more than anybody else's. Here's the existential piece for Israel. There are 2.4 million Gazans.
Mm-hmm.
That's a big chunk of population.
Yeah, it's large.
To take in. And if you decide to assimilate them and bring them in, that also means giving them voting power.
Oh.
Yeah. Take that one to its natural conclusion.
Oh, yeah. Uh-oh. Here we... It comes all the way back to that.
It comes all the way back. Always does. Look at who benefits from the situation.
What... It was so funny. Tom Sullivan was talking yesterday about how our government, the president says we're totally committed to Israel. We're going to start evacuating folks tomorrow. And so Tom started reading off all these countries that had already done that.
Yeah.
And it was like Chile and Lithuania. I mean, you go down this list, and it's like, really? And the United States has done nothing except talk.
Of course, a lot of Americans just got on a plane and left as soon as the plane started working, or they got on ships out of Haifa. A lot of ships have left Haifa with foreign nationals.
Oh, okay.
Because Israel still has the ports at near Tel Aviv and Haifa. They've got assorted ports along the shore. Again, you're not dealing with a big country. I'm actually forgetting for the moment how many square miles Israel is. It's not very big. I don't know what it would look like if you put Israel inside Florida.
It's so difficult. I think back to some of the just amazing conversations that I used to have. Casey Kasem, the very famous disc jockey, was very Palestinian and in support, and he used to send tons of money. And boy, to hear him talk, it's like, whoa! And you hear about total oppression and stuff, and just kind of think, really? Does this really exist?
Yeah, it really does.
It does.
And again, it's it's a no-win situation the way it is, and until the rhetoric subsides on both sides, it's not justified. And what the Hamas is doing to the Gazans is horrific as well. That's the piece I think that people don't get. They don't realize that there are civilians there who don't know any better. They don't know any other world because this is the world they grew up in. The average age in Gaza is very, very young. They don't live to old age.
Oh, okay.
They don't tend to live old unless they're extremely wealthy. So it's...
Do they even have like the basics like health care and stuff like that?
Some.
Some.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's not what the average American would consider acceptable. And they don't have the resources to do anything with. And when you add to that the blockade is doesn't give Gaza many choices. And Israel will say, well, that's easy. All the Gazans have to do is kick out Hamas. How? How are they going to do that? And thank you, Carl, let me pull it on my headset so I can hear you. Okay, thank you, Carl, on line 1.
Rabbi,
Yes.
on the news the other day, they made a comparison of Israel to the state of Vermont.
I'm sorry, you're an American in Vermont?
No. On the news, they showed the state of Israel, and they showed the state of Vermont.
Oh.
They said Israel is about the size of Vermont.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Give or take.
Yeah.
Not very big.
No, it's not. It's very, very tiny. I have driven it from end to end.
Hey, you could probably do it in a day.
Well, you certainly can go from Jerusalem down to Aqaba, which is the southernmost tip, and get there and leave reasonably early in the morning and get there sometime in the afternoon. Because I've done that. When it snowed, when it snowed in Jerusalem, we went down to Aqaba.
I've been reading a book about history of America, and I'm up to the part, it's 1600s, when they started the Ivy League colleges.
Mm-hmm.
Most of them will start by a religious minister,
Mm-hmm.
and most of the teachers were ministers.
Right, much of
Up until the Civil War, Harvard had a minister president.
Yep.
And those little bums got the nerve to side with these animals that are killing little kids. It's disgusting.
Okay, that's a whole lot of yes, but at one time science was under theology, was under the church, which
right,
is
because they were the only people in education.
right.
So
They wanted to
educate.
They wanted to educate priests.
Educate the right way
Yeah.
in their minds.
And the other thing that burns me up, our government gives those colleges money, and their endowment is millions.
Yeah.
They could put every kid through Harvard, never touch a balance. They could do it on their interest.
A lot of Harvard students pay nothing. There's a ton of scholarships that go out of Harvard.
Yeah, really.
They really do.
Yeah, that's.
But I tell you, it's a pleasure to listen to you.
Well, thank you, Carl. Thank you.
And I'm not Jewish. I'm a Lutheran, but I listen to you, and I love it.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you for that, Carl.
All right.
It's like, so Carl was talking about the origin of. I'm going to go ahead and take that off. But that universities and schools were started by churches, and that's largely true.
Oh, you
Partially
bet.
because they had the money and the resources and everything else.
Oh, yeah. You look even out California way, Stanford,
Right.
USC. They were both
The other
private schools.
The other hidden dark secret is that a lot of those universities were built on Indian land.
Oh God!
Some of the
no.
institutions in New York have admitted that, and they'll put it on their website that we recognize. You're not going to change it, and You know, there is no good way to undo the damage that's been done historically. There just isn't. There isn't a good way. No matter how I shape it or phrase it, we can't undo the damage that we did with the children. We can't undo the damage that the British did by promising both sides impossible things. And
well, you mentioned the British, and of course, Carol spent her middle school years in Pakistan, but that the whole carved up nature of Pakistan and East Pakistan and India. I mean, it just seems like the Brits just went, okay, this is what this is going to be, and then everything, falls into shape, which it doesn't.
And I'm going to say something that's not going to be well liked. We often hear about beheadings and all of that, but if you've got a group that have swords and not guns, it's what they're going to do.
Oh, brother.
So the more, I'm not condoning.
It's very primitive.
It's just very primitive. It's an old way of executing. It's not pretty. You can read about that happening in the Bible to people because it was the method they had. They didn't have guns. So it's just an old way of killing people. Now, I'm going to give you the piece that really wrenched me, perhaps the most of all of the news that I've seen. Oh, stop that, Mevo.
Your camera's acting up on you.
It does that every once in a while. The thing that really wrenched me totally was they were talking to a father who found out that his 8-year-old daughter, who had spent the night at a girlfriend's house, and they were in the kibbutz where they came in. So she was spending the night at her girlfriend's house, and they came through and they slaughtered, for lack of a better word, everybody in that house. And when he heard that she was dead, that they'd found her body, he cried for happiness because he said that was better than what would have happened to her had she been one of the hostages.
Oh, God. Oh. Gotta be kidding.
No, I'm real serious. They had him on film.
Oh,
to be able to feel that way is an inkling into the horror and the inhumanity that's happening.
There was this picture of a young lady on Facebook, and really, really cute. And she was kidnapped, and they have the video of her kidnapping. And apparently her parents put that picture up. Let us know if you've seen her. And you just think, what's going to happen to that kid?
Probably raped. At the very least. Again, you're raising people. Make no miscalculations here. Their cannon fodder, their foot soldiers, are raised to be animals.
Which is what Netanyahu and other folks have called them.
Right. It's not the average Gazan citizen. They grab up orphans. They grab up poor kids whose parents can't fight with them. And that's who they raise. That's not their leadership. That's their cannon fodder. And they know nothing better. They know no other life. I don't know any easy answers to this problem. But the longer we allow, and I don't know how to stop it, which I'm sure is part of the issue, right? How do you stop Hezbollah, Boko Haram, ISIS, Hamas? They're all They're all horrible terrorists. And they grow up in an area where there's economic abject poverty.
And you hear that Iran is funding all of this.
Well, because it keeps the attention off of Iran.
Yeah, certainly. Oh, my. Yeah.
Follow the money. The people who are benefiting by keeping this, they can, how can I say this? The amount of money raised in the claim that it's going to help one side or the other is keeping people comfortable in the first world. It's not helping the Joe citizens in the world. It's just not. It's not getting there. It's being funneled, it's being collected by organizations that are not using it to buy food, to buy medicine, to buy housing, or build housing in this case. And if you look at the videos, the pictures of Gaza, the short space, the piled high kind of housing they live in, it's horrific. And now we have Curtis on line 3. Thank you for calling.
Yeah, good morning. Good morning, Rabbi. How you doing?
I'm hanging in there. How are you doing?
Yeah, I meant to catch the beginning of this show because I figured it would be a good one, but I got so tired of doing other stuff that I'm just tuning in.
Well, you can always catch it on YouTube. Ask a Rabbi gets posted there.
Yeah, and we'll play it back this weekend as well.
It's also posted both on my page and on the congregation page on Facebook.
Right. It's just a mystery to me. War, violence, people talking about being sovereign and not even, and me not knowing exactly what that means.
That's what people.
And then we've got all the nations that, for some reason or another, won't say, "Stop. That's enough. Both of you, go back to the house."
Yeah.
And it's got to be more than one. It just can't be the United States. It's got to be everybody that do business with all of these people and hold their money and everything else. And it's enough of killing.
Isn't that, Curtis, isn't that what the UN was created for?
I thought.
But it's also been corrupted by a couple of things.
Yeah.
That's the reason I called in to get a take from a person like the Rabbi, which I find very, very educated in all areas and very, very smart. I've told her that before. What's your opinion? How can we
end
head
it?
towards stopping this?
So Curtis's question is, when we've got such inhumanity to man, right, to humans, how do we stop it? And you had one piece right. It's going to take the rest of the world saying, okay, it's enough of this garbage. Let's come in and let's do some things differently. And the issues are complex. They just are, Curtis. I wish it was something easy and simple. And you're right, it can't just be the U.S. It's one of the reasons why the U.S. is trying to work with other countries to say something. And, Greg said the UN, and the UN was created with the idea of having a place to debate and discuss hostilities outside of the theater of hostility. But there is a couple of problems even within the UN, one of which was that when the countries fractionated, for lack of a better word, and divided up into these little tiny that really are just city-states, they each get a vote. And in the Middle East, you have Israel, and then you have all of her Muslim and Arab and neighbors. Right? So it's one of the great misconceptions when people throw something like this on Islam. This really has nothing to do with Islam. They are Islamic because that's where they started. If they started in Tennessee, they'd be Christian. Right?
Yeah.
And I invite people one of the comments that I always say is, would you like the Westboro Baptist Church? to be the voice box for all of Christianity.
Oh God. Oh.
Okay. Right. So that's the piece you have to recognize. And
Right.
and I understand, and I'm not going to slide into the no true Scotsman piece, because yes, they are Islamic, but they're not Islamic because Islam made that. They're Islamic because a lot of Muslims are poor. And they're in areas where they're not getting the basic human needs that they see everybody else getting. It is a socioeconomic issue at the root. And people were promised things that never could happen. And I'm not going to say that, that's not enough of a reason, but it's a foundation to it. The roots are there. When people build on that for their own personal agendas, then you see horrible things happening. Right, Boko Haram, we never hear about it here in the U.S. You only hear about it when you check sources outside the U.S. That's because they are both Islamic terrorists and Islamic victims. It's two factions of Islam with a tribal mentality. The issue is
Right,
the tribal mentality.
And I guess the news is trying to differentiate between Hamas and Palestine or Palestinians.
They need to.
And the eye for an eye concept that never works.
Well, the eye for an eye is misread out of the Bible. This is a good, perfect
Okay.
segment, Curtis. So if
Hold
you
on just a quick second. We're going to take the CBS news time and go an extra 6 minutes, Curtis. So yeah,
Hold on.
Go ahead, Rabbi.
okay,
All right.
just so you know that's going to happen. So the eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth is a limit, no more than an eye for an eye or a tooth for a tooth. It's the beginning of tort law. It's to limit the revenge factor. It's to eliminate the escalation. You scratched me, I'm going to kill you. That's not acceptable. If you're going to punish somebody for something, it has to be comparable to the damage done. It's not about making everybody blind and toothless.
WPSL, Port St. Lucie.
So, we're going to use this.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you.
You
So
got an extra 6
All right.
minutes.
All right.
we're going to
Thank you,
overrun
Rabbi.
that. That's what he just gave us.
Yeah.
What a tremendous gift. So people totally misunderstand it. It's not about revenge. Revenge is poisoning yourself and hoping the enemy suffers. Just as anger is. Somebody's going to have to take